Astonishing! More thoughts on TOK essay number 4, May 2023. TOK essay 4, May 23, presents us with a quote from Bertrand Russell that it is astonishing that so little knowledge can give us so much power. This video is a short addition to my main thoughts in this essay title, which can be found in a card above. Initially, I thought that this essay title was about the relationship between the amount of knowledge that we have and the power afforded to us by that knowledge. However, the more I think about it, the more I think that the interesting, maybe central point of this essay is about the effective adjective astonishing. Here are 4 arguments why this essay could be about the astonishment that Russell expresses. Argument 1. Attitude to knowledge. The quote is centrally about our relationship to knowledge, about our attitude to knowledge. It's not about the measurable knowledge and the power commensurate to that knowledge. The TOK essay does not invite you to go into an autobiographical exploration of Bertrand Russell. So, at the danger of tempting students to do so, let's just briefly touch on Russell's philosophy. Russell was a pioneer of the use of analytic logic in philosophy. In later life, he became an anti-imperialist, and he was concerned with the use of power to subjugate fellow humans. As such, he was wrangling with reconciling a philosophy based on logic against human behaviours based on illogical prejudices or biases. In this context, we can start to interpret the quote as implying a degree of complacency, self-possession, even arrogance in our attitude to knowledge. The astonishment may come from our complacency in not wishing to know more, or our willingness to act despite having such limited knowledge. Positivism and empiricism. The key point is, I think, a commentary on the overwhelmingly positivist and empiricist age within which we live. The 20th and 21st centuries are periods within which positivist empiricism has triumphed over all other forms of knowing, to such a degree that the idea that a scientific fact is superior to any other form of knowledge is hegemonic, aphoristic, and near absolute. Our context is so imbued with positivism and empiricism that I even heard a Christian religious leader on BBC Radio 4 this morning use scientific proof in order to illustrate the limitations of faith-based belief. The potential dangers of positivism and empiricism is that its premise is that everything has an explanation, and therefore, consequently, everything can ultimately be controlled. Or maybe the premise is not the danger, but the exercise of that control with limited explanations, also known as knowledge. For example, Russell became increasingly concerned with the danger of nuclear weapons later in his life. Arguably, positivism and empiricism gives us a certain arrogance from our perceived place in the world and our ability to control that around us. It's human as progenitor rather than human as derivative. That's astonishing arrogance. Argument number 2, context-bound knowledge. Russell starts with the premise that we know so little. We can fully understand his point. Science and maths have shown us, through their particular methodology, that our knowledge is incredibly limited. Faith-based knowledge and indigenous knowledge systems commonly posit that we know very little, and they invite us to welcome that limitation. However, the experience of the positive age is the exact opposite. Arguably, our lived experience of the modern world is that we know a lot, possibly that we are on the verge of knowing everything. Just listen to how people use phrases such as, "it is a scientific fact," or "scientific research shows," or "that has not been scientifically proven." It's the use of science as absolute truth, universal truth, i.e. we know or can know everything. So, if we take my first premise, that most people assume that we know a lot rather than a little, maybe the quote is implying that both our knowledge and power are incredibly context-bound. Let's look at context-bound in a bit more detail. All knowledge is bound by its context. What we know today is everything that we know. The unknown is experienced as unknowable, and therefore it feels like we know a lot, or at least have the capacity to know all that we don't know. However, the problem with this argument is that it treats knowledge as an external reality waiting to be discovered. It treats knowledge like unknown areas on a map that we're yet to explore. This is the symptom of the positivism and the empiricism from which we all suffer. Now, we could take a more rationalist perspective, that knowledge is internally constructed. As such, we are merely limited by our imagination, our open-mindedness, our ability to both observe and to identify that which is significant. In which case, the astonishment may come from our limited inclination and impetus to construct more knowledge. To rephrase Russell again, it's astonishing that we live in an age in which we have so much power alongside such willful ignorance. Argument number 3. The assumption that knowledge gives us power. Now, I interpreted the quote as implying that there could or should be a relationship between knowledge and power. Knowledge gives us power. A viable TOK essay could go down the route of looking at what types of knowledge give different types of power. This would be particularly effective if it were based in the frameworks of the areas of knowledge. Again, if taking this approach, I would strongly recommend linking it back to the idea of astonishment. However, we could take a more critical approach. We could argue that the link between knowledge and power is tenuous at best, and possibly non-existent in some circumstances. This argument would be constructed around the idea that power comes from a wider range of factors than knowledge. For example, attribution, habituation, compulsion, culture, etc. But conversely, we could argue that the relationship between knowledge and power is inverse. Starting from a premise that by knowing more, we also become more aware of the extent of our ignorance, we could argue that increasing knowledge can be disempowering. Again, if we look at knowledge and power as being culturally contextual, then to gain knowledge external to that cultural context could be disempowering, as power is culturally defined. Further, if we define power in terms of personal utility, satisfaction, even happiness, we can construct an argument which is sometimes commonly put as ignorance is bliss. If these arguments were to be applied to the Russell quote, we can develop a set of counterclaims that it is not astonishing that with so little knowledge we have so much power. Argument number 4. Can. It's a proposition. The quote proposes that little knowledge can give us so much power. So arguably, Russell is not arguing that this is the current de facto state of being. He's not saying that little knowledge has given us so much power. He's saying it can give us so much power. It could be interpreted as a potential possibility. Now, that's not how I originally read the statement. I originally read it as little knowledge affords us so much power, but it could be argued to be a proposition. And if we do interpret it as a proposition, then the implication of the quote could be that there's not a direct causal link between knowledge and power. The arguments of perspective 3 swing straight back into view. Further, we can link this back to the dominance of positivism and empiricism. In a scientific age, we have the opportunity to have so much power without necessarily having to gain so much knowledge. It could be posited as an argument for our current forms of knowledge construction. Maybe it's astonishing that in an age characterized by the dominance of a posteriori reasoning, we use power in an a priori manner. So there we have it. 4 arguments about how essay number 4 could primarily be about astonishment. Of course, there's no single correct answer to this essay title, nor any of the other titles. Your task is merely to write a well-argued essay which provides a clear, coherent and critical exploration of the title. Now, if you want more detailed notes on this essay, you can pick up the detailed essay notes from the link in the video description. If you found this video useful, then a like, a subscribe, a comment or a share adds more knowledge and power to the channel, and it fills me with gratitude. Stay Stay talktastic. Bye.